Today is May 12, 2017, and we are soon to enter into the Sabbath, and we are currently in the first day of the second Feast of Unleavened Bread, that being the Feast of Unleavened Bread of the second month. And we're studying the community rule. So before we begin, let's ask our Heavenly Family to give us an increase in understanding. Eloheinu, our mighty ones, Todah Lakal wa Todah Le'emet. Thank you for everything, and thank you for truth. Please guide us as we study the community rule further. Help us to understand it as it really is. Please guide us to settle into the principles of acquiring knowledge, conducting genuine experiments. Help us to be filled with love and with a zeal for the truth. Thank you so much. We ask these things b'shem tzemach, in the name of Branch. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so same basic format we're going to be keeping. However, I will most likely be giving shorter introductory sections to these studies, since we're doing this every night now for the next, I think we have 6 nights left of doing this. So, since we'll be going through the community rule every night, I'm not going to give as long of an introduction, but I'll still mention a short introduction to what the community rule is, and we'll keep that same basic format. And maybe every night I'll refer people back, especially for those who will later be listening to this in recording, to the first study, May 11, which was last night's study on the community rule, at least within this feast, because it really outlines the principles of our investigation and what the community rule is and why it's important and all of those sorts of things. But anyway, I'll still give a brief mention of what the community rule is. Essentially, it is a text that was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls, of course, are a very important collection of ancient Jewish writings that was found near a place called Qumran on the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea in the land of Israel between the years 1946 and 1956. And that collection of writings belongs to a group of Jews which existed from the 2nd century BC until the 1st century of the Common Era. And that group of Jews was a priestly scribal community, most often designated by modern historians as Essenes, which is a certain sect of Judaism at the time, like, Pharisees, Sadducees, Zealots, and Essenes is another one. And this group of Jews had some significant, or I'll just say, ended up historically playing a role as somewhat of a forerunner movement to the movement of the followers of Jesus in the land of Palestine. And so it's really important for anyone interested in Jesus or his early followers or anything like that. It's very important. It gives us a unique glimpse into the times and setting of Jesus' ministry and so on. And also the founder of that movement in the early part of the 2nd century BCE, we've found in previous studies was an individual whom people like John the Baptist and Jesus and Paul and all of them certainly considered to be a true prophet. And so that's very, very significant. The community rule is a text that was written within that community, the Dead Sea Scroll community, in its early stages, perhaps even written by the teacher of righteousness. If not, it at least contains some of his teachings explained quite clearly. And the community rule is, out of all the documents found in the Dead Sea Scrolls library, it explains most clearly and fully the beliefs and practices and mission and self-identity of the community. And so it's kind of, in some ways it's kind of like a list of beliefs, but not really. It's not like lists of beliefs later. It's explaining the primary teachings and principles of the community. And in another sense, it's kind of like a constitution and bylaws. It explains how the sect operated and different things like that. And it's a very, very important text. You can probably learn more about the Qumran community from just that text than you could from any other one text in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So it's very, very significant, and it was certainly read, believed, and at least paraphrased by some of the followers of Jesus, perhaps even more, perhaps all or a great majority, but we know for sure at least some of them were familiar with the community rule and the Thanksgiving hymns, which are another collection of writings among the Dead Sea Scrolls. And the reason why we know that is because of the paraphrases and alluding to it and even living in a way that looks like they're following the community rule. Certain writings like the Gospel of John and the Odes of Solomon, and also the Didache, the Epistle of Barnabas, those writings show quite clear dependence upon the community rule in regard to certain things at least. So that's quite significant. So that's kind of what it is, why it's important, and there are other reasons, but these are just a few reasons why it is an important text. And of course, we're studying it in order to find out whether it is teaching truth. And we mean that in multiple senses. One sense is simply, are the claims put forward in harmony with reality? And then in another sense, we want to know, does it promote true righteousness and a genuine means of obtaining righteousness, or perhaps better put, becoming righteous? These are questions that are very important for us to consider. And of course, I've explained them more fully in previous studies, in last night's study for sure. So that's basically what the community rule is, why we're investigating it, and all of that. So the next thing is if there are any comments and questions broadly related to the community rule, and then after that we'll get into continuing a line-by-line investigation of its contents. As far as questions broadly related, as most, if not all of you on the call are aware, the reason why I say broadly related is because the questions should still be related, because we want to keep our focus on this topic in order to get to the bottom of it, as it were. But I say broadly because it's not necessarily that we have to just focus so narrowly on particular lines and so on and so forth. We have to ask the bigger questions about the community rule. We want to know what it means for us today, how it relates to the early followers of Jesus. How about just the Qumran community at large, or the whole movement of which they were a part? What about the teacher of righteousness? These aspects that are very intimately connected with the community rule, though not necessarily specific to it, but definitely connected. So there's definitely, it's an important part of what we need to do to ask some of those broader questions and to make sure that everyone gains a coherent understanding of how it relates and what it really means and so on and so forth. So with that said, does anyone have any questions or comments broadly related to the community rule? Okay. Well, as I mentioned before, we'll try and wait for only about 10 seconds so that we don't have super long, kind of silent times in the studies. So we will continue on with the line-by-line study of the community rule. The primary copy of the community rule found among the Dead Sea Scrolls of which we are studying is designated by the characters 1QS. 1 because it was found in Cave 1. Q is because it's from Qumran. S stands for Serek, which is the first word of Serek Ha-Yahad, which is the rule of the community, or the community rule. So that is the particular copy of it that is best preserved, and that's why it's the primary one for study for ourselves and for most people, just because it's so complete. But the other manuscripts are perhaps even equally important. The other copies of the community rule are very important, they're very significant, and as I've mentioned on previous occasions, when we get to column 5, we're going to have to discuss some of the other copies more thoroughly and get into some textual criticism. And we'll talk about that more when we get there. For now, though, we are in column 4, and the next line for us to investigate, let's see, Teresa, do you happen to know the exact line?
We finished going 20 to 23 is what we read. I don't remember how much we...
We read it, but we did not go through it.
Mm-hmm.
We only go up a little bit? Okay, 18 to 19 was the last part that we discussed. So this section of the community rule, starting at about column 3, line 15, is the teaching of the two spirits. Perhaps in this context, it's better to say the two principles, because we have the principles of light and darkness, truth and falsehood, and that's what this explains.
Where we're picking up is still on line 19.
Okay. Yes, because just to keep in mind for everyone, the community rule has never yet been divided into chapters and verses. Rather, it is designated by the column and the line of the actual manuscript found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. So we'll say 1QS, column 4, line 19b. That's where we begin. In other words, we're partway through line 19. But I'll read a few sentences prior to this in order to get some context. So, again, this is talking about the two spirits or the two principles, truth and falsehood, otherwise termed light and darkness. We could also say good and evil. And there are several other terms that go in each respective category. And so, here in this section of the community rule, it talks about the children of light, the children of darkness, and it talks about the God of Israel and the angel of his truth being the rulers of the path of light, or the principle of truth, and the messenger of darkness and all the spirits or breathing ones allied with him are ruling the spirit or principle of darkness, that is falsehood. So in column 4, the first 14 lines are devoted to explaining the manifestations of these two principles in the world. So, the manifestations of truth and the manifestations of falsehood, and also what will be the final end of those who participate in either spirit. So referring to these two spirits, this is what we read in column 4, line 15. In these are the generations of all the children of humanity, and in these divisions all their hosts possess an inheritance for their generations, and in their paths they walk. And the whole reward of their deeds shall be for everlasting ages, according to whether each man's portion in their two divisions is great or small. For God has set these as equals until the final age, and has placed everlasting enmity between their divisions. Truth abhors the works of falsehood, and falsehood hates all the ways of truth. And their struggle is fierce in all their arguments, for they do not walk together. But in the mysteries of his understanding and in his glorious wisdom, God has ordained an end for falsehood, and at the time of the visitation, he will destroy it forever. That's what we've gone through so far. Now this is the next sentence. Or, actually I'll read the whole sentence. Then truth, which has wallowed in the ways of wickedness during the dominion of falsehood until the appointed time of judgment, shall arise in the world forever. So, does anyone have any comments or questions concerning that sentence?
It sounds like... sorry.
Sounds like the truth was wallowing in the darkness. Sounds like it was doing it willingly, but we know it wasn't doing that. That was my comment.
Okay, that's interesting. And just to be clear as to what you said, I think I heard you correctly, but you said it kind of sounded like it was doing it willingly?
Now it said it wallowed. That kind of sounded like it's, self doing it, or itself.
Yeah, that's interesting. It did not come across to me like that, really. maybe looking up wallowing would be good, or another translation of it as well, because I'd be interested to see what the actual definition for wallowing is. I don't necessarily view it as a self-imposed condition, but yeah, interesting anyway.
It didn't have any choice, really. But anyway, that's just the way it come across to my mind.
Okay. Teresa just pulled it up in another translation. Another translation says, "Then truth shall rise up forever in the world, for it has been defiled in the paths of wickedness during the dominion of injustice," in this translation, which is falsehood, "until the time appointed for the judgment decided."
That sounds better to me.
Interesting. Okay. Well, what was your comment, Mary?
Oh, it just sounds to me like the kingdom, and then once truth takes hold, once everyone understands reality, then there's no going back, I would imagine.
Yeah, very interesting. And I certainly agree, once everyone takes hold of the truth, everyone that is, of course, then yeah, I cannot see how there's a going back from there. Although it is interesting how, there have been times where things really began to unfold. Like in the days of Jesus, the kingdom did begin to sprout and all of that. But, of course, it withered. And in the Apocryphon of James, Jesus tells James and Peter not to let it wither, but to bring forth fresh fruit. So that's quite interesting. But yes, I agree. This is talking about the establishment of the kingdom. Truth, which has been trampled underfoot and has been defiled, and it has been not enjoying the high seat it deserves. Truth will finally arise in the world, and it's forever. So this is talking about the final end of falsehood, of course, which is said in the previous sentence, talking about destroying falsehood forever. So that's absolutely wonderful.
Well, I have a question. You talk about the movement withering, and I know it has withered in the past. What would finally stop that from happening? Is there a critical mass? I mean, I know that sin won't, or whatever it says, adversity won't raise its head a second time. And, I would imagine when probation is closed and God has judged, he's judged correctly, that those that will be righteous still, and those that are wicked will be wicked still, But is I guess what would it take for it never to wither? Or what would it take for it to, if truth's always been in the world, You know what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think I do.
What?
Say God will not let it. Once everybody knows what evil is done, they won't have any problem choosing which one they want to continue on.
Well, it really comes more to the choices of the people, really, because, our Heavenly Family does not force, and it's not like they practice this whole not forcing thing for all this time, and then one day they're just going to not let it happen. They're just going to kind of enforce it so that it won't happen. They're going all the way with this whole letting people choose thing. And so, ultimately what it will take, it's kind of interesting, your question, Mary, because, what stops it from withering? Well, really, it's just not doing the things that make it wither. It's just like if people go into sin, well, yeah, it's going to wither. Like, this is what happened in the Nazarene movement. People became selfish. People stopped continuing on with goodness and righteousness and truth. And, there were false teachers that came in, and people rejected the truth in favor of lies, and people ended up, really just kind of making a mess of it, forsaking love. And when that happens, then the kingdom cannot flourish. So what needs to happen is for people to not do those things. And so, in other words, with the individuals involved, they need to really, they really need to just continue on with truth and love and absolutely forsake sin and settle into those principles and do what needs to be done in order for the kingdom to be established. And so it's not like, like our Heavenly Family can just say, okay, once you get up to a certain number of people that are in the truth, then that seals it and there's no going back from that point. It's not like it's set in any sort of way like that. It's simply there's a work that needs to be done in proclaiming the gospel to the whole world. And that, of course, happens in various stages, the harvest and all of that. So it's kind of like this. Can there be a wave sheaf manifested? Yeah, there can be. And in order for that to happen, it requires humans cooperating with the divine. So just so long as humans cooperate with the divine, and enough people do it to manifest a wave sheaf, and people are really doing it, then a wave sheaf can be manifested. So, there's a certain amount of cooperation and work to be done in order to come to that point of things. But let's say the wave sheaf is manifested and everyone else is like, we don't care. We don't care about righteousness. We don't care about truth. We're just, we don't care. Then the kingdom will wither. And especially if among the wave sheep people apostatize and all of that, well then, things will go downhill. But I will say that if there is a wave sheaf manifested, that's a powerful force to be reckoned with, and it will most likely have an impact. And then you could have 140,000 manifested. And, if they soften their hearts and receive the truth, well, it comes to a point where our Heavenly Family can establish the kingdom in the land. And then there's another phase of things to be done. And so it's not like, it's not like there is a set play to be carried out. And there's like a play button, and like there's like something that needs to happen in order for that to just roll and unfold, and once that happens, it's just like, boom, things are now rolling and unfolding. No, it's that every stage of it leads to the next stage of it, and the moment we cease to progress through the stages is the moment where it withers. So long as we continue to progress through the stages, and so long as when we come to the next stage, those who are involved continue to progress to the following stage, then it will go through all the way. So that's really what it requires. It requires continual advancement. It's not like we're working forward to a play button where, okay, now it's just unstoppable no matter what anyone does. Nope, because it comes down to people and what they do. So that's really what it comes down to. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, just that, so, basically, like, the community rule is saying that the conflict goes on until all the stages have been completed, and then there's really no conflict anymore, which would mean that's obviously after the judgment, right, of the living. When that's all buttoned up, then it can go on forever, right?
Well, what the community rule is referring to with the truth arising, and this is one aspect that we're talking about. I'm trying to remember if you were on that study or not. Perhaps you were, but perhaps you weren't. I can't remember for sure. But we talked about how this is not describing a sudden destruction of falsehood and then subsequently truth arises in the world. Then, in this context, is not referring to a subsequent event after the completion of the previously mentioned event. It's talking about then, meaning, and at that time, and in fact, I'm pretty sure in Hebrew that it's just the letter wow, which it means and. This happens and that happens and that happens. It's not describing sequence. It's describing further things taking place at the same time as the previous things. So while falsehood is being destroyed, truth is arising. And we know this from the context because, as it describes in this paragraph, truth is the thing which actually destroys falsehood. And so it is already arising right now. And basically it's kind of like this. What this is describing is the time when this does happen and it goes all the way through. This had a partial fulfillment in the early Nazarene movement of the first century. It even had a partial fulfillment at the time of the community rule, but it didn't have a complete fulfillment. Why? Because people didn't advance to the next stage. People stopped advancing and it withered. And so now it can have a fulfillment, and if people cease following the truth, that fulfillment will only be partial. But again, in its fullness, what it is talking about is the time when it actually does happen all the way.
Okay, thanks. I remember that, yeah.
Okay, cool. Any other comments or questions?
I got one if nobody else does right away.
Sorry, could you repeat that, please, Leroy?
I said I got a comment if nobody else had one.
Go for it.
I didn't do a very good job of wording what I was trying to say, but once everybody sees that wickedness is done away, and one like a Lucifer rises up and tries to take other people away with him, to fight against God, that it won't be allowed because everybody knows, that righteousness is better than the unrighteousness. So God will be able to stop it because everybody will agree with it. We don't want to go through that again.
Sure, yeah. If it would ever be instigated again, I don't see how it would end up becoming what this is, because it is. I mean, the records are being kept. Elamite talks about us going and testifying to the whole universe. And so, if anyone does choose to go down that path and engage in sin and selfishness or whatever, then I think that it will not be any sort of lasting phenomenon at all.
Nobody had ever heard of it. It never happened before. So.
Yeah.
They didn't even know there was a law.
True.
Once it's gotten out of the way one time, then there'll be no problem next time. Anyway, thank you for letting me share that little rewording.
Well, thank you for sharing it.
Yeah, I have something to say there regarding what Leroy said. I was thinking, Leroy, that you were referring to when Satan gathers the lost people together to try to take the city. I was thinking you were referring to that period of time where God wouldn't allow him to do that because truth has already won. Did I misunderstand you there? Because that's what it sounded like to me.
I would include that, but I was talking about if falsehood ever,
if it happened again. Okay.
We'll always have that freedom to sin, but we won't want to now that we've had a little experience with it.
And also, as we read further, we're talked about how God is going to cleanse us of all our wicked deeds. So I'm looking forward to some comments on that. So, okay, that straightened it out for me. I was thinking that's what you were only referring to, but now I see. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, one aspect of this sentence that I think I think all aspects, of course, are worthy of serious contemplation. But an aspect that we haven't really discussed much yet is the whole idea of wallowing in the ways of wickedness and or being defiled by the ways of wickedness. That's another translation. Has anyone by chance been able to look up the definition for the word wallowed?
I didn't look it up, but the only way I've ever, the main way I've heard it used is a pig wallowing in mud. That's just kind of getting in all the crud, Or sometimes I've heard it referred to this way, like they wallowed in their misery, just like almost enjoyed it. So I don't know what the meaning here is supposed to be, but those are the things I think of when I hear wallowed.
Okay. Well, we're not hooked up to the internet right now, but if someone would be able to look up the definition, I would definitely be interested, and then we'll also look up the Hebrew underlying this word.
Okay, I'm on the dictionary. So it's a verb chiefly of large mammals, roll about or lie relaxed in mud or water, especially to keep cool, avoid biting insects, or spread scent. And then it says of a person to indulge in an unrestrained way in something that creates a pleasurable sensation, which I think that probably applies pretty well. So to indulge in an unrestrained way in something that creates a pleasurable sensation. And I would say that's what's keeping us from the truth in this world for sure.
Amen.
Yeah, very interesting. So we're going to look up the Hebrew here just to see if the word is literally defiled. So one second here. Okay, so we looked up the Hebrew word, and the basic form of it is galal or something along those lines. I'm not sure. Okay, one second. Galal. And it means to roll. That seems to be its basic meaning. And I'm just looking it up. I'll get some examples. Okay, so Genesis 29:3. And when all the flocks were gathered there, they rolled away the stone from the mouth of the well. Okay, so rolling away a stone, several instances of that. Joshua 5:9, and Yahweh said to Joshua, "Today I have rolled away the disgrace of Egypt from you." Interesting. Jeremiah 51:25, and I will roll you down from the cliffs. Isaiah 9:5, for every boot that marches and shakes the earth and garment rolled in blood will be for burning.
The whole idea of a pig wallowing in the mud is a pig getting down and rolling around in the mud.
Yeah. So here, though, it seems to be, like, the way that it's used in these other circumstances is not necessarily describing the experience of the thing in terms of its emotional response to the activity. It's just describing the act itself, rolling. So that's kind of interesting. Yeah, there is in the Lexham English Bible one instance where it's translated wallowing. It says in 2 Samuel 20, verse 12, now Amasa was wallowing in the blood in the middle of the highway.
So that'd be like, laying there in a pool of blood.
Yeah. So the idea is that truth is, just rolling around, getting dirty by being in so much contact with wickedness. This reminds me of a couple things, actually. One thing is Ellen White's... this is William Miller's dream. Wasn't there something about cleaning the jewels or the gems, like all the, the scattered gems of truth, and then there is an aspect of cleaning them, right?
Well, either they were being cleaned or all of a sudden they were all clean.
Okay.
I don't remember the specifics on that.
Okay. But the idea there is that you had these scattered gems of truth that are there in the dust, as it were, and then they're picked up and cleaned, whether it describes the process of the cleaning or the fact that after the fact they were clean. That's the idea. There they are, just covered in dust and all that. And then the other thing it reminds me of is how Ellen White describes what Jesus did, how he took the truth out of the framework of error in which it had been placed. Truth had been placed within the framework of error in the minds of people, and he presented it in its right setting. And so that gives us some sort of understanding of what it means for truth to wallow in the ways of wickedness. And, I think we can see that very clearly here. I mean, okay, let's just take the letters of Paul, full of wonderful truth. Or let's just take 1 John, whatever it may be. Take one of these writings and look how much it has been polluted by being intermingled with false interpretations, and people have used some of these writings to promote awful things. People have used Paul's writings to promote a false gospel that absolutely makes no sense. And so, this is just an example of the sort of thing that it means to say that truth has wallowed in the ways of wickedness, or rolled in the ways of wickedness, or being defiled in the ways of wickedness. Truth has been placed in a wrong setting and ends up being corrupted.
For our salvation.
Well, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that, but
Jesus come to this earth for our salvation, and he had to wallow in our unrighteousness while he was doing it.
Okay, yeah, Jesus definitely had to do that, and he certainly did so for our salvation. Yeah, definitely. And really, of course, what that means is that he, in endeavoring to clear up what exactly the truth is, was mistreated and abused and all of that. And what he actually did for our salvation is to clear up the truth. But in his experience of abuse, that's used for the truth as well, because it highlights his love for us. The reason why I want to specify that is that people don't think that it's like some kind of automatic thing that Jesus had to be mistreated in order for people to be saved, because, well, someone's got to be mistreated because people deserve it because of sin and all of that. It's simply that that's what happened to him, even though it should not have. And he paid that price to bring us the truth. Though here, of course, in the community rule, when it's talking about truth wallowing in the ways of wickedness, it's not talking about Jesus wallowing in the ways of wickedness. It's talking about truth itself. It's talking about the principle of truth and how it has been mistreated and how it has been defiled and corrupted and polluted and all of that. And that, of course, wasn't for our salvation. That was the act of the devil in order to rob us of salvation. So the truth being cleaned, as it were, the truth being, perhaps the better word is cleansed, having its pollution removed from it.
It had been defiled.
Yeah, it had been defiled. And even if you say wallowed, earlier in the community rule, it talked about someone defiling their feet in the ways of...
wallowing in the mud of wickedness. There's that phrase.
That's right, yeah. And so, it's using this kind of being rolled in the mud thing as a symbol for being defiled anyway. So, truth...
plowing the mud of wickedness, I think.
Oh, plowing the mud of wickedness. Yeah, I think you're right. But anyways, it's showing the idea of it being defiled, and that was, of course, the work of the devil in corrupting and polluting the truth. And the part that's really for our salvation is in cleansing the truth, in taking the ideas that are actually true and brushing all the falsehood and lies off of it, clearing it up for us so that we can see it in its true and full glory.
So we can be changed by beholding. I tried telling my friend that Jesus could have saved us without him having to die. He says, no, he couldn't. Got all these prophecies that got to be fulfilled. So I'd like to talk about that sometime.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we've talked about on several occasions, and one of the main studies for that is the truth of sacrifice. The truth of sacrifice is probably the primary study for that, because that's basically what it's devoted to. And yeah, that's certainly an important topic.
Thank you.
So any other comments or questions on this sentence? Okay, so I'll just read it again here, and we can read it with more understanding now. Then truth, which has wallowed in the ways of wickedness during the dominion of falsehood, until the appointed time of judgment, shall arise in the world forever. Now, really interesting also that it says, during the dominion of falsehood, which of course is implying that there's a time when truth has the dominion. This actually gives credence to something that we have put forward in previous studies. And so I'll explain what that is. But first I just want to mention how this might appear to conflict with something it said a little earlier, because it said that truth and falsehood were established as equals until the final age. Well, if you say that they are established as equals, then how could you say that one of them has the dominion? So that might seem like a contradiction, like, oh wait, it said they were equals, and now it's saying during the dominion of falsehood. Well, what this shows, what this really gives credence to, is the thought that we've expressed before in the calls, that it's not that God has just, you know what, here's a world, it doesn't have truth or falsehood in it, I'm going to put them both there, and they're going to just fight against each other. No. That's not what it's trying to promote. It's talking about how falsehood was there, and falsehood was having dominance, and then God brought in truth to rival falsehood. But still, falsehood is being dominant, and truth is countering it and rivaling it and not allowing it to go to its full extent. It is as an equal to falsehood. But the fact that it describes falsehood here as being dominant, talking about this period of the dominion of falsehood, shows that that's what it's talking about. It's not talking about God just putting both into a totally amoral world. No. It's talking about a period where falsehood is having dominion, and then God is countering it by means of the truth. Another thing which gives credence to that idea is the fact that earlier it talks about how with these two spirits, one God loves and the other God hates. God hates the spirit of falsehood, and he loves the spirit of truth. And also, it talked about from the source of light comes all the, I forget exactly how it words it. Let me just go back so I phrase it correctly. From the source of light come all the generations of truth, and from the source of darkness come all the generations of falsehood. So you have two different sources, one of light and one of falsehood, or one of darkness. And God is not the source of both. So God did not just say, hey, you know what, I'm going to bring both of these and put them in. No, God deals with truth. He loves truth. He is ruler over the dominion of truth, or he has dominion over truth, not over falsehood. And there's this period of the dominion of falsehood, and he's bringing in truth. He's not putting them both in. He's bringing in truth in order to counter the falsehood. He's bringing light to counter the darkness. And so that's really what it is promoting. And so that's the last aspect of the sentence here, so far as I can tell, that we haven't really discussed yet. So are there any comments or questions on that aspect? Okay. Well, we've been on for just over an hour, and I think it's good, especially when we have so many calls in a row, to keep the meetings at a reasonable length. So I think that it'd be good for us to end the meeting now, and then we'll continue on tomorrow night with the next sentence. How does that sound to you guys?
Sounds good.
Yep.
Sounds good.
All right. Awesome. Would someone like to thank our Heavenly Family then?
I will. Dear Heavenly Family, Sister Wisdom, we thank you for your teaching that we're learning about our gods that are totally different than what we've always believed. Please give us wisdom and understanding to share that knowledge with others so they can know you better also. Be with all of us. Be with our children, our neighbors, our friends, our church family in Laodicea and Babylon and Davidia, especially the leaders that are resisting the advancing truth. Have mercy. In the name of the branch, Jesus' new name. Amen.
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 All right. Love you guys. Lila Tov.
Shabbat shalom.
Lila Tov.
Lila Tov.
Lila Tov.
Happy Sabbath.